I'm very glad to see all of you here. And I know many of you may have woken up early just in order to come and see me, so I would like to thank you very much for that. If you missed the introduction, I hope you did, since I'd really like to thank Darby for the wonderful job. One of the best introductions I've ever gotten, for sure. If you missed the introduction, my name is Adora, and for those of you who just walked in and are wondering why a 13-year-old is speaking to you, then I could give you a few different answers. I could be like, because the ECIS invited me here to speak, which is certainly true because K-12 sponsored this speech, which is also certainly true, because I have a great supportive family, my mom and dad, who I'm hoping my dad has gotten back somewhere in the audience. But I would say that one of the things that has definitely made my speech here possible are my experiences on both sides of the classroom, which is the title of the speech. You might be wondering what's I mean by both sides of the classroom. Well, since I published my first book, Flying Fingers, which I have on the table here. This is my first book, which I published at the age of 7. But I would start traveling around to different schools, giving assemblies, starting to talk in classrooms, to other kids about why I liked reading and writing, and why it was so important that they did too. And I was really excited to start this after, because I love reading and writing from a young age, and then when I heard that other kids did, then I wanted to get involved. And since I teach kids, and adults too, then a lot of people have asked me, well, are you still in school? And I am. I go to an online public school, as Darby said, Washington Virtual Academy. And I also take a couple of classes of brick and mortar public school. So in this way, I have the experience of the kind of blended learning that students are now beginning to get in international schools around the world. Which means that I'm not just a teacher, but I'm also a student. So in this way, I've been on both sides of the classroom. But my experiences on the teaching side haven't just been limited to talking to kids in person. I've also done video conferencing out of my basement, and that's been very successful. I've reached over 400 different schools and classrooms. If you take a look at a short clip of a video response to literature, then you can get an example of what one of these lessons looks like.
Stuff like that just wouldn't make as much sense as it does. So the setting of the story is important, the plot, the characters, the themes, and our enjoyment of the story. In other words, it's super important. The second paragraph of our response to literature is going to tell our readers about the setting of our story.
So that's an example of, you might not be able to see this particular part, but there's actually students on a video conferencing system right there who I'm talking to. I'm not just randomly talking to myself over there. And video conferencing has definitely allowed me to reach out. I use web conferencing, I use all kinds of different things. And so during these writing sessions, one of my most commonly requested was actually descriptive writing. And so during one of the descriptive writing sessions, I might be talking about descriptive writing to students, and I talk about it, but I also really want the students to do it, to practice it. So we might use an example of a treehouse, for instance, and then say, well, what does the treehouse look like? How big is it? Let's describe it. What are some of the special features? Use the 5 senses. Something easy to describe, fairly common, so the treehouse works well. Now, I remember a time when I was wanting to explain point of view to some students, and so I took this treehouse example on a descriptive writing, and I said, well, I wouldn't even think about the treehouse from the perspective of the kids playing inside. Pretty easy, right? Now, get a different point of view. Think about the treehouse from the perspective of a bird, or maybe even the tree that the treehouse is on. So they come up with all these really interesting things from the perspective of a tree like that, and think, it's cool to have a building on me because it keeps me warm. And I'm not sure exactly scientifically if a tree needs to keep warm, but it's possible. And then there were some other ones who were like, it's painful having nails driven into my tree. So there were lots of these different points of view from students about a tree house, whether from a tree or from a bird. So, what is the point of thinking about a tree house from the point of view of a tree? Well, in this case, there was this hands-on example to students of the literary point of view. But in a larger sense, perhaps this can be about more than just the tree house. I want to invite all of you to be not just the person building the tree house with the kids playing inside, but the bird or the tree itself. And if that sounds kind of weird, and what is this girl saying? What's this stuff with the tree house? Basically, I'm inviting you to feel what it's like to be on both sides of the classroom. Just as it's always a good idea to hear two sides of an issue. Maybe you heard that from your parents, look both sides of the issue, don't judge something before you have all the information. I don't think that we can truly understand learning and teaching until we step into someone else's shoes. For many of you who are teachers or administrators who are in charge of international schools, then stepping into someone else's shoes might mean stepping into a student's shoes. The insights that we can learn will help us form the education systems of the future. Speaking of the future, it's a widely held belief that education has some catching up to do when it comes to technology. What do you think? Does education have some work to do when it comes to integrating technology? Or at least some areas? Yeah, I hear some nods. A lot of schools still, maybe we have our computer labs, so we might not have all of the new systems or different infrastructure in place. We heard from Sugata Mitra about schools that they don't necessarily have working internet. So education definitely has some catching up to do. And it's not just education either. If you talk to some of my peers, or if you talk to my age group, then you'll definitely hear some belittling of adults, the over 40 age group, when it comes to using technology. When someone I know who didn't want to be named in the audience somewhere heard something about seniors on social networking, and she said, "Old people on Facebook? That's just wrong." And she was joking. And it was fairly obvious she was saying this joke, but I think it's representative of how unused to adults really participating in change and technology like that. And it's probably true that some of the younger people in the audience may be a little better or maybe a little more used to adjusting to and initiating new technologies. So what gives us that special ability? Maybe it's less about ability, it's not anything that makes us particularly special, and more about circumstance. When you were growing up, did you know how to podcast, post a video to YouTube, blog, tweet, use online social networking? Raise your hands if you did. Not seeing very many raised hands. Huh, strange. Well, with new technologies like iPods and computer cell phones, the internet, then we students live in a world that is increasingly technology-driven. 20, 30 years ago, technology was developing, it was important, but it wasn't such an integral part of life. Could you have predicted 20 or 30 years ago that friend would become a verb or tweet would become common usage? So I was actually going wearing this baseball cap to put on my head as my student hat, but I want to put on a virtual student hat. And I encourage all of you to put on your virtual hats as well. So imagine that you're someone close to my age, born in the late 1990s or so, I was born in 1997. How would your life be different if you were growing up in these times? What are some of the things that you might see moving ahead in life? Already in my 13 years, I've seen the switch from VCRs to TiVos and DVDs. And just take birthdays as another example. What were birthdays, say, in the late 1800s or the even areas of the early 1900s? It was a celebration of the fact that you weren't dead yet. It's like, yay, I lived past my 56th birthday. That's wonderful. But today it means going on your Facebook wall and seeing well wishes from around the world. Because that's an actual snapshot of my Facebook wall. My generation has grown up with the internet being a staple. Okay, maybe not since that yet. But it's hard for me to imagine living in a world without laptop computers, internet, and email, much less calculators. I read an article on CNN which said that most children, 82%, in the Western world have an online footprint or a digital footprint before the age of 2. I actually jumped the figures and made it 82%. And in the US, 92% of 2-year-olds are pictured somewhere on the web. These are incredible figures. These are babies. So maybe that picture that I showed you of the little baby on the computer, maybe not the baby, but definitely their parents or their aunts and uncles are posting those pictures and giving them this online presence. How did you get your news a few decades ago? Probably through nightly newscasts on TV or on the radio. And while millions of people, including myself, still watch those nightly newscasts, and the way that we get our news now, raise your hand if you check news online on a daily or weekly basis. I see a lot of raised hands here in France. I'm wondering what's going on because I'm not able to understand the French and watch the news very well. And so I might go online, I might go scan it, and New York Times or something like that, type it in and find it very quickly. So online news, again, something that didn't exist a while back. And we can get news from our favorite blogs, Twitter, Facebook, Sometimes these avenues even provide more news than the regular ones would. If you remember the protests in Iran, then you'll remember that a lot of the information that we got from the country, even when a lot of it came from recent block, we got it through Twitter, we got it through Facebook, social networking. So the nightly news channels were getting their news from these social networking outlets. These are the eyewitness reports of the 21st century, if you will. As is evident from watching the news, from the protests in Iran, from all the different issues that went on last year, this year, we have a lot of problems that we face in our world. Problems like cyber warfare, resource scarcity, conflict, extremism, climate change. There's a lot of different problems that we're facing now that we have to solve. It's a lot on anyone's plate, and it weighs even more if you're not prepared. Today's students have to be equipped with the tools that we'll need in order to combat challenges like this. Education must create citizens who can't just get a good job or are able to do that. They also have to be able to solve complex global problems. We've heard quite a bit, I think it was evident despite looking at the program, because you have global citizens, global problems, magazines, you have all this, you have all these different globally themed things, and I think that's great because it shows that we're definitely becoming aware of, wow, we need to get our students ready for these problems. In order to create innovators who can learn new skill sets and create and find the answers to questions which may not even exist yet, then we have to innovate ourselves. Technology pushes us to defy boundaries and encourages us to pioneer and helps to unleash our creativity and imagination. You can see a lot of examples of innovation here at ECIS. I mean, there's the iTunes UV launch. You go to any of the sessions, you'll see a lot of technology in use, a lot of teachers and administrators wanting to learn about different technologies. So we're definitely getting there. A few other ways the world has changed. Like today's students have many different career options ahead of, we have many different career options ahead of us. But those career options have changed. I mean, who worked in forensic accounting 100 years ago? Who was a menu psychologist or a green funeral director? But with the revolution of technology over the past 50 years, many job titles which were commonplace have gone out of existence, like a chandler who made candles. I heard that was a job title. Not too many people do that. We're changing jobs more. The U.S. Department of Labor estimates that today's learner will have 10 to 14 jobs by the age of 38. So you might used to graduate from high school or college, get a job, stay fit for much of the rest of your life, or as long as you fit. And today, more competitive, volatile economy means we're switching jobs or getting new jobs, these old jobs, at a very rapid rate. So what does all of this information, what is this point of view from a 13-year-old about the world that we're growing up in, the world we're going to, what does this all mean for 21st century students, and what does it mean for 21st century schools? What is all of this information, what relevance does it have for education? Well, in order to best shape paths for the 21st century students, it's vital that you understand what sets old student pathways and new student pathways apart. A tale of two paths, if you will. You might wonder why we can't continue to pave the same paths as we have. I mean, these are school systems which have produced great presidents, great artists, great thinkers. And it's an old school path. You sit in a room, you listen to the teacher, relate the facts of the world, you memorize the take test, and that's your education. Why not hold on to a good road? But the thing is, in a changed and changing world, that approach no longer works for everybody. Because the internet has changed the way we look at knowledge. And when I said this, my parents said, no, it's not just the internet, books did that. And indeed, books democratize knowledge. When the printing press came out, it made knowledge readily available, or at least fairly readily available for you to buy books. It was no longer where you had to spend years just copying out a book in a monastery. And it made information more plentiful and cheap, especially as time went on. So in an age of global connections, we have connections to others on the internet, we have connections to books, we have connections to all these ways to knowledge as well as to people. And today's students, especially those at your international schools, are famous for their diversity in background, ethnicity, and skill level, how they learn. These are all things which differ on a case-by-case basis, and so we can no longer just have this one-size-fits-all kind of classroom. The 21st century has brought innovations in technology, science, transportation, how we get our information. But when it comes to teaching and learning, I think it's time for you to catch up with us in the 21st century. Being on both sides of the classroom means using the tools that matter to us. If the internet is the printing press of our time, then too many educators, I think, are stuck as the monks copying books in the monasteries by hand. So it's up to you to not only innovate when it comes to how you teach, but also from whom you learn. I'll be talking some about why the teachers need to learn from the students. And today I'm hoping you'll make an effort, figuratively, to sit on both sides of the classroom. Let's start with the how you teach part. Think back to some of the best teachers you ever had. This could be high school, middle school, elementary, college, very life members, whoever it is, the best teachers that you ever had. Why do you think that they were so effective? So think about your best teachers and why they were so effective. Now, raise your hands if you felt that those teachers made a personal connection with you, that they cared about your learning. I'm seeing fairly unanimous raised hands. Yes, it's this personal connection that we have to strive for in our teaching. Because after all, learning is about connecting. It's about connecting facts and places and ideas, but also about connecting people. You have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of my role as an educator? Maybe you administrate your school, oversee projects, if you're teaching them grade homework, lead changes, and these are all extraordinarily important things. But one of the most important things you do is form personal connections with your students. If you think back to your best teachers, you probably felt that they weren't the ones who read line by line out of the textbook as they taught the class and taught classes like automated systems. Yesterday we heard that quote that if a teacher could be replaced by a machine, they should have said that. The best teachers probably aren't the ones who teach like machines. They're probably the ones who take a personal interest in your learning. You felt really cared about you and how you did. Sugata Mitra, who we saw speak yesterday, big fan, he gave children easy access to a computer through the hole in the wall. So learning doesn't necessarily require an authority figure present, you might wonder, then what is the role of the teacher, tutor, professor? And then obviously that's where, as you heard, the grandparent comes in. It shows you this personal connection. Having someone there who is available, who is standing there caring about work, admiring, whatever it may be, that personal connection helps learning a great deal. And teacher-student relationships can affect us even before we get to be of school age. Patricia Poole is a professor of speech and hearing sciences at the University of Washington, who's widely known for her work with babies, and I saw her speak at an event called TEDx Junior. And she talked about studies that she'd done with babies and their capacities at learning new languages. And she told the very interested audience that at birth, babies are citizens of the world. That is, they don't really discriminate about the sounds of different languages. They respond to all of them, all different languages, not just the one that they're born into. But after they hear that one language from their parents, after constant exposure to that one language, then they lose that ability to respond to all the syllables from all of the different languages. They become nationalized. When that was counteracted, however, when American babies were exposed to a Mandarin research assistant who came into the home and would actually speak with them, much like having a Chinese relative in the house, as she put it, then they showed about the same level of recognition as babies in Taiwan and in mainland China did. However, here, previously recorded Mandarin audio on TV had no effect. The babies seemed to know when it wasn't a real person. So what does this mean? Like Sugata Mitra's example of kid-directed learning helped by the Granny Cat, it goes to show the importance of personal connections. And even online, I believe that you can make those connections. In my own experience as a student at the K-12 school, Washington Virtual Academy, then I found, I've seen firsthand how important it is for teachers to try to get to know me and to reach out. The teachers I like best are those who reach out, who have multiple online presences, whether that means email, instant messaging, Google Voice, Illuminate, quite a few different availabilities, many ways that I can reach them and that they can reach me. I've been learning online for a little over 3 years now, close to, I guess, about 4 years. And I've seen a wide range on online teaching. In my time at the Wap Middle School, then I was very lucky to have a great teacher, Mrs. Vidovich, who took a really personal interest in the work that I did. So she would send me emails on where I would travel to next, she would watch my teaching videos, leave comments, and even order some copies of my books. These seem like small gestures, but it can be incredibly important when it comes to having a presence in your student's life. Maybe some of you have seen this kind of thing or really made an effort to reach out to students. You might have seen great teachers who try to make this effort to have a presence in a student's life. And even if you're not an online teacher, but one who sees your student on a day-to-day basis, this is equally important. It's important to have some kind of real connection with your student. So I'm now going to put on my virtual teacher's hat and discuss one efficient way to have an online presence, which is to have a class blog. So if you take a look at some examples of class blogs, I'll go over to the computer now to show you. So raise your hand if any of you, with your school, you have some sort of online presence, whether it's through a blog or a website you update frequently, Twitter, Facebook. Raise your hand if you have some kind of online presence. I'm seeing a few raised hands, so there's still some people who don't have their hands up, and I definitely encourage you to think about having a website you update frequently or a blog or some way that students can really connect. So for instance, this is Mrs. Gullis' classroom blog. Third graders learning and sharing together. And as you can see, this is a movie session that they were holding. There's lots of videos, they post pictures, they post about some of their learning experiences. And one of the greatest things, I think, is that if you go over to Meet the Bloggers, then there are 22 students in the class, and all of them have the opportunity to blog. So it's giving students the opportunity to have an audience, giving them the opportunity to share their work. And one of the great things about this is that it's giving a real purpose. You know, when you write something and you turn it in to your teacher and you get it right and you get it back, you know, where does that go? What do you do with it? So having something on a blog or something you can update with an audience, whether it's just your class or your school or the whole wide world, I think can be very useful. This is another example of a higher grade. This is an 8th grade science class at a school, and so you can see there's tests that are posted on here. There are all kinds of enrichment things, for instance, press releases, scientific press releases. So there's a lot of different content and the occasional, picture or humorous video or something like that. So these are examples of blogs where teachers are definitely making an effort to reach out to their students. If you go over, actually on the Griffin Science blog, you'll see that there is the Twitter feed going on. I think there's a Google Voice or something like that. So yeah, it's a lot of different ways to get a hold of the teacher. So personal connections, you might think this is hard to do online, but it's actually really easy, whether you're in person or an online teacher. And I think it's very important for all of you to see how you can bring something like an online presence into your school. For those of you who haven't, I would definitely really suggest going to that, because being able to connect with teachers on more than one level makes a very good learning relationship. And so blogging is one of my favorites. I will talk about it in my follow-on session a little bit more later, but one of the things that I like about it is that when I see students blogging, then it definitely encourages them to be more careful with their work, think about grammar spelling, because after all, other people will be reading them. To put my student hat back on, I like having a purpose when I read nonfiction especially, and if I have a creative blog post in mind, an article, and something like that, then it definitely gives me a greater sense of purpose. And I think many other students can agree about this as a motivating factor. Instead of just reading something because I have to, because my teacher told me to, I'm reading it because doing so will help me in my goal, creating a great article, blog, or whatever the assignment may be. So it doesn't just have to be blogging either. I highly encourage all of you to come over to this side of the classroom and experience some of the things that we love to use, like social networking. You don't necessarily have to do a big rollout or school, but definitely investigate it and be able to talk about it as a discussion point with students. To put my teacher hat back on, I know it's a little confusing with all the switching, when you heard me say social networking, what was the first thing that came to your mind? Maybe you thought of Facebook or MySpace. You might think of LOLing, OMGing, and taking Are You a Cookie quizzes on Facebook. It's actually really easy quizzes, saying like, or there's also argument, do you have eyes? Do you have a, yeah, it's a dumb quiz, but you hear all these examples of shallow communication, one-line emails, more emoticons than words. And one thing I would be to worry about is that as our communication allows us to go wider, we're able to communicate with more people on a wider scale than ever before. At the same time, we have to make sure that our communication isn't just going to be more shallow, it still needs to remain deep. And this is what I mean. With background communication, meant writing a letter that might take you forever, it would take forever to get to the place, and you would probably think pretty carefully about what you put down if you're willing to spend a lot of money about getting here. And all the shallow communication we have today might make you a little skeptical about the ability of online technology, particularly social networking, to help education. Maybe you've seen evidence of the contrary. Maybe some of you have seen students slacking off because they're texting or they're on social networks, maybe with your own sons or daughters. But I would argue that just as I've seen kids who are distracted by internet gaming and networking, I've seen kids who are using internet tools to post meaningful work and help others. We often hear about adults who are searching for the meaning of life, who are searching for higher purpose, for relevance, but many neglect the fact as students that we want relevance, purpose in our lives, particularly our educations as well. I was reading an Edutopia article about social media and education that mentioned this example. So being it off. In true problem-based learning format, a science teacher, Brian Hewitt, asked a group of 8th graders at a school to pick a problem in their local community and solve it. They picked buffalo grass, a fast-growing, flame-resistant menace which is cheaply imported by some states, listen up Texas, as inexpensive erosion-controlled cattle feed. But like setting out a bee horror film, it devours the natural habitat, stealing the water and sucking the nutrients from the ecosystem. So it goes on to describe what I had. But once the students had discovered the plague like weeds, they weren't sure how to spread the word of its horrors. One student declared that they needed to get the word out. After all, knowledge is power, which was then they decided to create a Facebook page devoted to the threat. They soon posted a rap song on YouTube, which you'll take a quick look at. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it's sort of funny. So here's the buffalo rap.
Buffalo grass. And as you can see, there are seeds.
No! My name is Therese, you're the come anytime. You can talk to me as long as it rhymes.
Yeah, so as you can see, they made this rap about buffalo grass. It was sort of like a more fun, interesting version of a public service announcement, actually, about buffalo grass. And I'm not sure they were millions of their lives. I mean, they're talking about native plants that are crowded out. In fact, that's what it is. So to continue the Edutopia quote about the project was all about student choice, the scientific method, and getting the word out to different states, courtesy of the little 21st century know-how. In so doing, we created a learning community and nurtured what many teachers scratch their heads to achieve, students who love the learning process. Using the social networking tools of our age, this one Tucson teacher and a small group of students began to educate politicians, farmers, and Facebook fans like me. Using 21st century tools, they've become advocates for their own local community. This is an example of service learning. We saw a lot of, actually, there's a big theme here at this conference that I'm very glad about, of service learning. And one of the things that I like best about this example is that the project made this issue really relevant to kids. You know, you don't expect, let's say that you have a science teacher and the science teacher comes out and it's like, today we're class we're going to learn about buffalo grass is this, you know, you kind of tune out. But when you're actually investigating, you're doing the work, you're finding out about it, I think that there's a drive that you might not be able to find very easily if you just taught a lecture. And so by giving the students ownership, by letting them take control of this project by an issue they cared about, and a very obscure issue that I hadn't heard about before, I thought that was a great idea. And it had an impact outside their classroom. I ran a conference in September called TEDx Redmond. TEDx events are independently organized TED events. And TEDx Redmond was unique, and it was organized entirely by kids. So I was the curator, I was inviting the speakers, and I had this wonderful committee of other kids, and we worked on the program, every aspect of it. And you know, our parents weren't super involved. They were, you know, accompanying us to meetings and stuff like that, but not really. Big part of it was really very student-driven. And best of all, not only was it all planned by youth and attended by youth, we sent the adults off to a simulcast room, but it was also where speakers were all youth 16 or under. And we had 19 amazing speakers. And we actually, there was many more speakers, musicians that I wanted to get, but we didn't have enough time. So as you can see, there's no shortage of kids out there doing great things. And I was actually going to show Zoe Spankel's video about impact and purpose, but the video doesn't actually work, unfortunately. It's the audio is a little too soft, but I'll just tell you what she said. She said, to paraphrase a little bit, that like many of the people in the audience, she had spent most of her early life learning in a classroom that was very, very four-grade walled. And the work that she did in there didn't have impact, effect, and purpose on the world outside. And so she had started out with 3 words, beginning with speech, impact, effect, purpose, and then gone on to say that education was not providing opportunities for her to have that impact, effect, and purpose on the rest of the world, to make footprints on the world. And it's an amazing speech. I highly recommend that all of you go to TEDxDriving.com, Zoe Spankel's video, and watch it. And this impact, effect, and purpose that so many adults are seeking for, we kids are also seeking for it as well. We were talking with Arnie Bieber, the chair of the ECIS Board of Trustees, wonderful person, at the reception on Thursday night, and he said that one of the most unfortunate things that he hears from students is that school's boring, and obviously that's saying that he doesn't like hearing it, wants to change. And I think that this is in large part because of what Zoe said, the lack of impact and purpose that we feel inside a classroom. Which is one of the wonderful things about service learning or giving students the opportunity to take on projects is that it's going beyond the bubble, it's not being so insular. Instead of just bringing the world to students through textbooks and through lessons, that we're actually making an impact on the world. One way to do that, to make service learning really interesting, is to understand what technologies we like to use and make them education applicable. The World Food Program has a program called Free Rice, which is a wonderful example of doing that, taking technology and learning and applying it to helping the world. So if you go to, I can even spell it right. Okay. So has anyone here heard of Free Rice? Raise your hand, yeah. I see a couple rice hands. So basically, it's this website you just go to. For every answer you get right, donate 10 grains of rice to the World Food Program to help end hunger. So this is something that I actually heard about through word of mouth. It was a very youth-driven in that it was my sister's friend told her, she told me, and you know, it spread through schools, it spread through kids like that, as well as adults. And so you have the English vocabulary question. This is level 1, if you're wondering why that particular question is so easy. It goes up to level 16, which is impossible. I don't even want to show you level 60, it'll drive me crazy. But it is, you have a real product in your class that can be like that high. So basically, it's harnessing technology, it's harnessing the simplicity of a website, as well as social media. You can share it, you can tweet it. And this is something that really applies to kids very directly. If you go back to the buffalo grass example, the kids were creating their own Facebook page, they were creating a YouTube video. We love using social media, the internet, all of these tools, and it's very important to harness them. So we get back to the free rice example, it actually allows you to create groups. So if you go to, which is another great thing, because for kids who are competitive, you know, different classes might want to compete against each other. Do any of you guys have like school fundraisers or magazine drives ever? Or some sort of like, I don't know, school-wide event, and maybe students compete against each other, it might be a sports event. You can raise your hand. I see some raised hands. So if you have something like that, where you're getting kids to compete against each other, to do something, then you know that that can work. extremely well. So this one, it also lets you create groups, compete, so different classes could do that. I find it really funny how there's like Christians fighting world hunger, atheists giving aid. I think there's also Muslims against hunger, so it's very funny. But about different religions creating their own groups and working together for a common goal. So this is a great example of taking things that we on the side of classroom really like to use, social media, word of mouth groups, competitiveness, taking all of that and using it for good in the world. And you can take that lesson and apply it to education, whether it's a service learning project, which would apply very directly, or it could be something in another subject as well. So I believe that this is a wonderful example of what you can do in an innovative classroom, is to have social media have all of these different aspects, online presence. An innovative classroom isn't just one, as I said earlier, in which the world comes to us to learn. It's one where we have footprints on the world. It's one where we use online technology like blogging to create meaningful work, where we see purpose and audience. And an innovative classroom is a connected one, in which students can connect with teachers, administration with their school in more than one way. Maybe not just going to school every day, but maybe online. Maybe through Twitter or Facebook or one of the other opportunities that you might use, an educational networking platform, whatever you choose to do to create an innovative classroom. I find it extraordinarily important that you also include students in making these decisions. Because the decisions that are made about your schools, whether it's something very trivial, something very large, these are all decisions which affect us. So I think it's important that you consider the voice of the student, you consider the point of view of the student when you're thinking about the future of your school, because it is our future as well. We know that we can create this innovative classroom with the help of technology, but what about when it comes to helping you with using the technology? Raise your hand if you've ever had issues with a piece of technological equipment, whether in school, actually in school, yeah. Have you ever seen malfunctions in school with technology? Okay, I didn't even need to ask you guys to raise your hand, that was kind of obvious. And outside, I'm sure you all had that in your homes. Kind of inevitable to live in the 21st century, something will go wrong, whether you like it or not. Now, raise your hand if you've ever asked a kid to help you out with a piece of technology you were having difficulty with, whether it's school or outside. I see some raised hands. I can't really raise my hand. What I meant to say was my mom asks me for help with the iPhone all the time. And I could be wrong, but I think that I see a bit of a trend here. I was in a couple of the Apple Distinguished Educator sections the other day, which were very interesting. And it was funny when people said, well, you know, I couldn't train you to be as good at technology as a 6-year-old, even if I wanted to, or even if I tried. So yesterday we heard from Sugata Mitra about how intuitive the kids are with technology, how quickly they were learning it. And as I said in my introduction, our world has been technology filled since our birth, and so it's normal that we're able to be more skilled with technology tools. It's a commonly accepted reality. But it might also irk you a little bit that you have to ask younger people to help you out with something. It might make some people uncomfortable. But if you find yourself in this position, it's fine, as long as you're open-minded about catching up.